get a few more minutes, I want to talk about artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of talk about whether artificial intelligence is going to be the great equalizer. It was interesting, during a banking hearing recently, I made the claim that perhaps on compliance burdens, it will again skew to the heavier, to the larger banks. And actually, a regional bank officer who was testifying said, no, she thought that it might actually bring costs down and allow you to balance, depending upon what products out there that's going to provide that kind of compliance check. So if we looked at, this is a function we're asking banks to take on for the betterment and the security of our country. It's not something that, that is part of their business model, but it is a critical component of making sure that we're safe and secure. And so when we look at artificial intelligence, does it make sense to look at products which can be deployed and look at shared costs for that kind of technology that will lower costs for smaller financial institutions, but achieve a better result consequently? Mr. Ponzi?
Senator, you're hitting on, I think, one of the most exciting ideas in AML in a long time, and I agree with everything you said. I would just point to the relationship between the potential of these new technologies to include artificial intelligence and the need for data. The data that you need to drive AI systems so that you have real fidelity on the results and understand that this is a bad apple and this one looks like a bad apple, but it's actually legitimate. Requires pooling of information at the moment is constrained by information sharing restrictions or ambiguities. There's a section in my testimony, and I know we've talked about it in other places, about the need to clarify and strengthen information sharing allowances, if not requirements, so that financial institutions can do exactly what you're saying, that they can take their transactional information, their customer information, their counterparty information, throw it onto a platform with the right kinds of controls around it, where these types of artificial intelligence systems can exploit that data to learn what good looks like and what bad looks like. Once those models are established, those can be migrated to other platforms. We don't know enough, frankly, at least in my view, to know what is the best way to do this, but clearly the next step is to encourage pilots around these sorts of enterprises, and that can be done with stronger information sharing allowances or requirements and incentives to banks and others to play. I'll just, two more points because they're related. One is, if you think about this from a bank perspective, you're the general counsel of a bank and you hear this conversation, you can think, this is really exciting, we should do it, but what happens if I put my information into that platform because I want to do the right thing, and then there's an investigation stemming from my voluntary, right, or at least my proactive approach to compliance and risk management, that all of a sudden exposes my bank to an enforcement action. I can't do that as a general counsel in good faith, as a fiduciary to my institution, create that exposure. So what kind of downside protection are you going to give me? We can't give safe harbor. We've all been there before. But we can be creative in thinking about protections that incentivize institutions by giving them downside risk management. On the upside, if I'm going to be putting my information into this platform and dedicating analysts to that, do I get any credit for that? Because that's not necessarily in my exam manual, it's not necessarily part of my exam process, and these are resources that have an opportunity cost. So if I'm playing in that space, what sort of credit do I get for that? I know that sounds petty, but it's not, because if you're sitting there running these programs, you have to make these choices, and this is where congressional direction can really help.
Yeah, I don't think it's petty. I think that we're asking banks and financial institutions to perform a function that does not add any value to them, but adds value to the country and the security of the financial system as a whole, but also the security of our country against human traffickers, against money launderers, the whole 9 yards. So tough topic, but I'm really concerned about what's going to happen to our small community banks as we put more and more regulatory burden on them. More regulatory burden and a high-risk regulatory burden. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.